Hey everyone, it's Jana from The Last Stitch. In today's video I will talk about a topic that might cause some confusion, some frustration, and maybe even make ourselves feeling a bit bad. And what is that, you might wonder? Well, I'm going to talk about sizing system and size chart. Try to get to the bottom with what they are, how to understand them, why they differ between different brands and even countries. And is there really such a thing as vanity sizing? Well, that is what I'm going to talk about in today's video. So, size chart from a history point of view is a fairly recent innovation. It began in the 19th century where garment industries started to appear, so there was more of a need basically for a more standardized sizing system. Before that, of course, well, everything was kind of tailor-made, so to speak. But now when you're starting to make lots and lots of clothes for a large range of people, then obviously there was a need for having a more standardized way of approaching sizes on bodies. Now, as we all know, there are lots of different size charts out there. The probably more common determinator is that they're either using numbers or letters to explain. For instance, the numbers one can be in the US, size 2, size 4, size 6, in the UK, 12, size 14. In the Northern Europe, it's usually size 32, 34, 36. So these are all sizes that have been around for quite a long while. But of course, depending on what type of customer they're serving, and of course, if our body sizes are changing or our bodies, then the size charts are being adjusted, which is one of the reasons why it's so confusing. And this is also very much a present thing in the sewing community, because you will notice if you go and look into different pattern designers, you will notice that they often have different type of size systems. For instance, the big four, I think they're usually called, they have a size system that differs quite a lot from my understanding, US ready-to-wear, whereas a lot of the so-called indie pattern designers are instead using more size systems that are similar to ready-to-wear. And in Europe, basically, we have the same type of size system for ready-to-wear as we have for our sewing patterns, with the exception, of course, that some pattern makers choose to find a different type of size system because maybe they feel that the numbers or the letters are a little bit of a misrepresentation. So they try to create a different size system that is, how shall I say it, less loaded and less prone to becoming confusing, because we have so many ideas attached to a particular size, so many emotions attached to a particular size. So for instance, I know that the Australian pattern designer in the Falls, she has instead created a size chart that has letters. The problem when you're using a different size range than what is commonly accepted is that you also usually have to have like a correlation size chart where you say what my own size chart corresponds to in ready-to-wear, for instance. So it's really hard, I've noticed, to actually like move away from the size system that we are already having in our communities, which also is one of the reasons why it's so very confusing. So to give you a backstory about this, I think one has to remember that sizing charts is nothing that is set in stone, at least from the most part. There are definitely attempts to standardize size charts, but for now, each company will decide on what type of size chart is more suitable for their target customers. So for instance, I checked a couple of pattern designers that has very specific body types that they are serving. For instance, Colette Patterns, I think they were one of the first pattern designers that very outspokenly said that we are drafting for a larger chest. So I think it's a C cup or D cup. I could be wrong because it was a long time, and I'm also not in the demographic for that particular pattern brand for the sizing, but I think they do draft for a C cup if I'm not correct. So whereas Holic, the Canadian pattern designer, she devised a size chart for someone who's pear-shaped, which is basically a person who has a smaller chest and is fuller around the hip area. So these are definitely two different type of body types, but they are using the same size chart. So for instance, I'm going to run down a couple of differences now for size 8, so you can get your head around how you cannot just trust a number. You really have to drill deep into the particular brand's size chart to really understand what type of body type they're actually serving and if that correlates with my own body. So for instance, Sewaholic chest width is 88 centimeters, which is about 34 inches, whereas Colette's chest for size 8 is 94 centimeters, which correlates to 37 inches. That's quite a lot. It's 6 centimeters and over 2 inches difference, and remember, both are size 8. When we look down at the hip again, we can see the big differences. So Sewaholic hip size for size 8 is 103 centimeters, which is 40.5 inches, whereas Colette Patterns has a hip width of 99 centimeters, which is equal to 39 inches. So that is a big difference, and I personally think it's really good that pattern designers are targeting a specific body type and make that clear. I don't think that is an issue at all. In fact, I'm sure that a lot of people that may not feel served in the ready-to-wear industry, where they're much more standardizing because they don't really want to deviate too much from like this standard body type. There is no such thing, but you know what I mean. But whereas a smaller pattern designer can actually be more clear about if you have a fuller chest and you have issues with finding good fitting clothes in other sewing patterns and in ready-to-wear, then go to my brand and I will serve you better. The same goes for Sewaholic's pear-shaped. If you are having a narrow waist and a rounder hip area, then you can try out my pants, because you know they will probably have a silhouette that is more fitted for your body type. So I think that's really good. But that is why one has to have that background understanding why there might not be a standardized sizing. So, and that really applies to also ready-to-wear. For instance, a ready-to-wear brand is catering towards very young persons, regarding it to female or male. They will usually have slightly smaller ones, because as we age, many of us will, you know, add a little weight. We become a little bit rounder here and there, just the way we are. And it's not really, it's really hard to avoid, because that's just the development of a person. So many of us will have a bit more fullness when we age, whereas as we are young. But obviously companies still want to have like a good range. So for instance, a size medium for a brand that is geared towards teenagers might be a little bit smaller than a size medium that is geared towards a grown-up person in his or her 40s or 50s, because we are changing bodies. And I personally don't think it's correct to call that vanity sizing. I know that it gets a lot of bad rap, but I think one also has to understand that not all bodies are the same, and as a population in many countries around the world, we have been growing both height-wise and width-wise, which means that leaves all companies, regardless if you're a sewing pattern company or if you're a ready-to-wear company, that leaves them with a big problem to solve, because how are they going to keep the size system as well as it was and going to expand, moving into XXX, XX large and so forth, or are they going to try to adjust the sizes so that the medium, so to speak, is still very close to the largest group of their consumers? So that is the problem that a lot of companies are struggling with. Another thing that is really important to remember, I think, is that we also differ a bit in how we are built depending on where in the world we are living. So for instance, in the Netherlands, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the country that has the tallest population, probably maybe share with a couple of other countries, but they definitely stand out compared to lots of other countries. And if you are a fan of the Dutch pattern magazine Knipmode, it's also called Fashion Style in Germany, you will notice that they actually draft for a person that is several centimeters or about 2 inches longer than the standard person is, at least here in the rest of Europe. So that again makes for a bigger difference, but I can understand that because they are trying to serve what is representative for their largest target customer group, hence why their person will be taller compared to, say, a pattern from the Japanese pattern magazine Mrs. Stylebook, because in Japan traditionally people will be pretty much a lot shorter than the average Dutch person. But when they are doing these type of size adjustments to fit into their customer demographic, then it definitely does cause one problem, and that is that those people that were in the smallest size range, and they are still those people, they will no longer have clothes that fit, because if the adjustment as the population in average are growing, then of course the sizes will grow with that to reflect that change, but that might leave the people that are still in the smaller spectrum of those sizes will be underserved. And that is actually the reason, which I didn't know until I researched this video, that is the reason why this really weird size 0 because appeared in the States, because basically the number range, and I think 2 also wasn't present before. So basically, because it started such a low number, the slots were already taken. So that is apparently the story as it goes. One of the designers with credit for this is Nicole Miller, but I'm sure there are other people as well who did that a couple of decades now. They introduced those smaller sizes like size 0, even 00 I think it's available now, just to serve that a bit small customer group, but still very much existent, that wasn't no longer served because the regular sizing had grown. So I guess that is what people mean when they say vanity sizing, but I rather call it a size adjustment, because it's just a way of different companies and different countries to adjust their size charge depending on what type of customer they are targeting. But there is one problem with this thing when they are starting to adjusting the sizes is, as we all know and as we just talked about, there are so many different size charts out there, and it's super confusing. And you might be a size 32 in one, you might be a 36 in another, or 8 or 14. It can be all over the place. But there's actually in Europe an initiative to try to solve this issue by presenting a new way of addressing sizes. But spoiler alert, it's not going that well, because the fashion industry is very slow to adapt this new system, even though it's been around for a while and there was a new push in 2017 about trying to implementing this. But as far as I've seen, not many companies have actually began to use this sizing system. And you might wonder, what is that sizing system? Well, it's actually really simple, and I'd love to hear what you are thinking about that approach. So what the European authorities want to do is to create a sizing system that is based on your body measurement. So that should be the key numbers, not size 34, not size 12, not size medium. So what they want to do is all garments has to have a label with the body that has the key measurements stated. So for instance, if you are a European size 38, then a female, then there should be a female body, and it should be pointed on the chest, the size range. For instance, in this case, it's from 86 to 90, which is size range for the chest width. That should be stated, the waist range for that particular size, and then of course the hip. So they can still keep the old numbers like small and medium, 34, 14 in the UK or whatever, but the key measurements should be your measurements. So you, instead of the size, which can, as we all know, be all over the place. Now, I think this is a really good system. I can see why companies are hesitant, because the older systems are so ingrained in everything, and I don't think any company wants to be the first one to lead the way, right? They're all looking at the other companies and want them to make the move first. And secondly, I can also see that it adds both money and more work for them, because they have to add another label, and that is also only valid in Europe, where they show this pictogram of the body and the measurements for each and every size. So they have to create a label for each and every size. So I can imagine that there's a lot of pushbacks because of that reason as well. So this is not an easy thing to solve, but if you look at it, I'd say it's a very sound approach, because then it kind of removes all the stigma and the confusedness, because you actually only look at what your measurements are, not a particular size. I also want to talk about how to understand the size chart, because I also think there's a little bit of confusion when it comes to that as well. So for instance, if you see in your size chart that there is a recommended chest measurements of 88 centimeters, for instance, then it doesn't mean that this is the high range, it means in the middle. And it depends on what size system you're using, but for instance here in Europe, most sizes are graded around 4 to 5 centimeters when it comes to hip and chest measurements, which means that I think that's roughly, you could say, between 1.5 to 2 inches. It depends a little bit on the size range. For instance, in the smaller sizes, it's a little bit less between each size, and when it moves up more into the plus size range, there's actually a slightly larger increments between each size. I guess that's based on how the body can change, so they have probably done some calculation regarding this. I'm not 100% sure how that works, but the important thing to know is that you should not pick the size based on looking at the number to see that this is the highest number I will fit. It should be the middle number. So for instance, if it says that the hip is 32 inches, then of course that could mean that it could move to about 31.5 up to 32.5 inches. I've noticed that in the States, for instance, I don't know how it's in the UK, but they're actually moving in small increments. It's usually 1 inch up to a certain size, I think about size 14, and then, which is earlier actually, and then in European system, then they move up to 2 inches. So it's a pretty big jump there. The jump in the European size charts are actually smaller compared to the jump in the States. Not sure why, but that's also really important to know, that you shouldn't look at the number and think, oh, this is the largest I can be in this size. No, it's actually in the middle, and I think that's really good to have in mind when you're trying to figure out what size you're going to pick. Wow, that was a long video. That was definitely a topic that I could speak a lot about, and in fact I probably have even more things to say, but now I'd love to hear what you're thinking about this topic. Do you agree with me that it's fine that different brands have different size system because they're targeting different customers and different countries, or would you rather have one sizing system that is the same regardless of company, regardless of country? I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, because definitely it's a very complicated topic where there's really no easy answers. So there definitely, I think we all can agree about that there's definitely room for improvement regardless of what stance we take on this sizing issue. So I hope you enjoyed this video and perhaps it gave you some food for thought. As I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you haven't already, please hit subscribe for weekly sewing videos. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.